I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. It is hot as hell in Chicago. I was out in the streets earlier today, walking around the community, taking care of a little business, and I bumped into Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they were complaining. So much for the fiery furnace. I mean, it is Hades here. I know it's Hades in Los Angeles, Hades in New York. It's just hot out here, and this has to reflect problems with our nation's climate. No doubt about it. The politics are hot, the weather's hot. Drink some water, stay hydrated physically, but also stay hydrated with good, solid information. Did you all hear Leonard Pitts in the last hour with Tavis Smiley talking about truth circling around a drain? How beautiful was that? Not much truth left, but you can get it certainly here at KBLA Talk 1580. Today on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show, our guest in the first hour is one of the nation's leading pollsters and research strategists. Live on my Facebook page, live on YouTube, we will continue to dissect Zohran Mamdani's surprising and stunning election victory in New York's Democratic mayoral primary. We will look behind the numbers and what the electorate was trying to say through the lens of none other than Cornell Belcher. There are a number of critical questions that we need to ask of Cornell Belcher. Is there anything that we can gain from the voting system, the cumulative voting system in New York that the New York primary brought forward? And how do we distinguish messaging from the winner-take-all systems where most Democratic primary contests occur? Cornell Belcher develops authentic messages from sincerity of the messenger. He founded the Cornell Belcher Brilliant Corners Research and Strategies Company in 2001. He's one of the premier strategists in Democratic politics across the nation. Brilliant Corners is a nationally and internationally respected Democratic polling firm. Brilliant Corners conducted groundbreaking work on behalf of the Democratic National Committee, which culminated in its widely successful 50-state strategies. What does that say? For 435 members of Congress, the election of Zohran Mamdani in New York. What does it say for 435 congressional districts and races across the country? What does it mean for Hakeem Jeffries? What does it mean for regaining control of Congress and putting the brakes on the MAGA movement from the House of Representatives? What does it mean for the Senate? What are the consequences of that? Well, just no one knows behind the numbers what Cornell Belcher knows, because he tests everything. And these numbers and these trends speak volumes about what is happening in our country. He's one of the lead pollsters for the Democratic National Committee. He was instrumental in expanding the electorate and providing the foundation for the historic gains of the 2008 presidential election. In addition to its critical role as a member of the Obama for America polling team, Brilliant Corners continues to assist high-profile corporate clients with their branding and repositioning needs. On our show, we try to back up the things that we say with facts. That's one of the mandates that Tavis Smiley gave me when he offered me this magnificent opportunity to be on the radio. Bring the research, bring the people who've done the work. In the first hour on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show, none other than one of the nation's most brilliant strategists, Cornell Belcher, will be our special guest when we come forward after the break on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest who will be joining us momentarily is one of the nation's leading political strategists. His name is Cornell Belcher. He has conducted dozens, if not hundreds, of campaigns across the country, and he has provided some of the most remarkable and accurate numbers for messaging in the United States. And while we're waiting for Cornell Belcher to join us, I want to share with you how this process works. In a congressional district, I've run a campaign in one of them 8 or 9 times successfully myself. And the first thing I do after conducting a voter registration drive is I conduct a poll. I go to the State Board of Elections, purchase a list somewhere between $2,500 and $3,000 to determine every single voter in the jurisdiction to which I seek to receive answers for the inquiry. That list contains every single registered voter in the Secretary of State's office in that jurisdiction. It could be a congressional district, it could be a city, it could be statewide, it could be the entire nation. What that list reveals to me is this. I know every voter who voted 5 times out of the last 5 elections. I know every voter who voted 4 times out of the last 5 elections. I know every voter who's voted 3 times out of the last 4 elections, 2 times out of the last 5 elections, 1 time out of the last 5 elections, or have not voted recently. That's what that data provides. For the 5 out of 5 voters, I know they're going to vote in 2026. They pride themselves in never missing an election. The 4 out of 5 voters are high propensity voters, meaning they are likely to vote in 2026. And the 3 of 5 voters are voters that are inclined to participate in 2026. Rather than sending a piece of mail, persuasion piece of mail, or running a commercial for all voters in a congressional district or across the entire jurisdiction of, let's say, a major city, I want to target people who I know are going to turn out and vote because I can save money. Communicate with them by radio, by certain demographics, by certain income groups. And in that information, I then call them systematically. Today, AI, various programming techniques at call centers around the country allow me to reach into various pockets of voters with that information and ask them a series of questions. How do you feel about the economy? How do you feel about job security? How do you feel about healthcare? How do you feel about education? How do you feel about housing? And certain questions reveal certain answers to me. And in those answers, it helps shape the message of my campaign. I'm running for mayor of the city of Los Angeles to stop forest fires, to provide free water for people. In the case of Mr. Mamdani, free transportation, control rent, health care for women. And when I touch these issues in the speeches that I give or in the debates that I have, they resonate with men and women who tend to be high propensity voters. That is, voters who are paying attention in this particular campaign. After I get that data, I then run something called a tracking poll, maybe 6 weeks or 2 weeks or 2 months later. The tracking poll tells me if the voters are now identifying with the message that I've heard them share with me that they want advanced in the New York General Assembly, in Springfield, Illinois, in the state legislature in Los Angeles, California, in the city council of any given city in the United States of America. That's just how scientific polling is. And when I have that first batch of data and I look at the tracking polls, it tells me whether or not I am on a trajectory to be heard by the voters. And if by election day I am on the upswing of that trajectory, the strong probability is that I will win the election. That's a fairly unscientific analysis of how polling is conducted. But something surprising happened in New York. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, James Clyburn, they supported the established name in New York, former Governor Andrew Cuomo, over the millennial, the Gen Z, the Bernie Sanders, the AOC choice. Mr. Mamdani had a campaign based upon authentic idealism. He spoke to the hopes of people and what, if he were elected mayor of the city of New York, he could bring forward and was committed to bringing forward and articulating as mayor. I've seen this before. I've seen it in Brandon Johnson in the city of Chicago. He brought the same idealism on the possibilities of what Chicago could become. Excited, enthusiastic, filled with energy. And then beyond the campaign, the next challenge, of course, is governing. Trying to move ordinances through a city council, Los Angeles, Chicago, or New York. Trying to identify the revenue to pay for our dreams. What I know about the big, bad, beautiful bill that Donald Trump is trying to push through the Congress of the United States and promises to affix his signature to by July 4th is this. The big, beautiful bill is going to slash Medicaid. It will be virtually impossible for poor people who need operations, who need surgery, who need basic health care to check into local community hospitals without the reimbursement from Medicaid to help keep those facilities open. How does a poor person who needs cardiac surgery get a surgeon in an operating room with 8 other assistants to repair a heart valve for a process that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars? The indigent. It is simply not possible to provide care for those men and women without the federal assistance to those hospitals, those institutions, without Medicaid, without health insurance, without the reimbursement from state governments to ensure that those facilities stay operational. And so when Mr. Mamdani and other Democratic candidates, and he is the Democratic nominee for the city of New York, even as a Democratic socialist, he is the Democratic nominee, make the case for health care for all, or for housing for all, or for improving education for all, or even for a clean, safe, and sustainable environment, there comes a point in time in this process where you have to convince the voters as well how you're going to pay for that dream. I've argued that that dream has to be paid for over long periods of time, that it's not a quick fix. Crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, adding a new toll booth here or there, isn't sufficient to be able to make up for the shortfall that will inevitably hit local states and local municipalities when Donald Trump's, and if Donald Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill becomes law. A $10 trillion tax cut for Mr. Bezos, Mr. Zuckerberg, for people who do not need one more yacht, one more mansion, one more car added to their collection. while the masses of Americans can't afford to get to work, are being replaced by artificial intelligence, who are struggling with making a difference in their lives on a daily basis. So how do we do this? We speak to the ideals, to the hopes, and to the aspirations of our people, but we also are somewhat conservative in our offerings so that we don't let people down when we get there. How do we not let them down? We join them in community of expectations. The good that we would do, we must do, and we can do, and we identify with it. But then at the same time, we share with the people that we're going to have to get the money from where the money went. If the rich are paying less taxes, we're going to have to get the money from them to pay for our dreams. Our nearly $1 trillion military budget, we're going to have to get the money from where the money is being spent. Hence, Dr. King and many before Dr. King, and certainly many after Dr. King, agree with the prophet. We must study war no more. Where do we get the money from? An ecological disaster, drill, baby, drill. Where do we get the money from? Mineral deals, while the Ukrainian people continue to struggle and continue to die against Russia's massive aggression in Ukraine. Trump got the deal he wanted, but he did not bring the peace. He wants to do a deal with Iran. But for the Israelis and the Iranians, I believe they will know no peace. He wants a real estate deal in the Gaza Strip. He wants to build a resort. But there, the Palestinian people will know no peace. He wants to send immigrants, those who migrated here legally and some who migrated here illegally, to foreign nations. But they will know no peace. You see, our peace must come with a justice component, a human fairness component, where you don't take all of the minerals and all of the opportunities off of the table and look at people who also stand, walk, and live on those lands. You leave them nothing from which they can broker, engage in participation in the global economy. I remember as a seminarian reading a book by Susan Totten called World Hunger. And there she said the third world, Africa and South America, continued to provide the world with all of its raw materials and raw resources. Rubber from Liberia, lithium in Africa, and some deposits here in the United States, the Soviet Union, and China to make batteries for electric vehicles and for cell phones. Cobalt in Africa. None of these things are possible without raw materials. So you take these raw materials from underneath the Africans, where the first world digs deeper and deeper and deeper, and every generation digs deeper and deeper and deeper into African soil. You bring the raw materials to the United States or to any first world country in Europe, where it is refined and it's turned into a finished product. An electric vehicle, a car, a tire. Most of the Goodyear tires that we use on our cars come from Liberia rubber, a land filled with rubber trees. But by the time the cars get to Liberia, the average Liberian can't afford to buy a car. The raw materials necessary to make the car are simply not available for the original consumer. All of this started with how an American voter felt and the leadership that they choose in the polling process. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, hopefully our guest will join us, the great strategist, Cornell Belcher. Jackson Jr. Show. Our very special guest in this hour is none other than Cornell Belcher. Belcher develops authentic messages from the sincerity of the messenger. He is one of the nation's leading political strategists, recognized across the country, indeed around the world, and certainly his groundbreaking work for the Democratic National Committee. His efforts to help and successfully elect Barack Obama president of the United States has earned him every accolade that you can imagine. And his regular participation on NBC and MSNBC clearly demonstrate that he is very highly sought after. Cornell, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thanks for having me on, brothers. Good to see you.
Man, it's always a pleasure to see you. And I want you to know that every time I see you on television with that wonderful sign, Jesse, behind you, I am tickled to death. Cornell, welcome to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
I'm honored to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
Cornell, is there anything that we can discern from the shocking, the earth-shattering event of Zohran Mamdani's election in New York? What message does it send to the Democratic establishment?
Well, I don't know how shocking it is and earth-shattering. I mean, I want to step back and contextualize this, right? It is so for months upon months after the 2024 election, we've been hearing, particularly younger Democrats, saying we want change and we want something different, and we don't want the same old. And if you understand what happened in 2024, part of the issue was, in fact, we had a pullback, right? You had over 6 million voters who voted for Biden in 2020 simply not turn out in 2024, handing Trump a victory. And those voters were disproportionately younger. And you know this well, Jesse, is that if you're talking about the younger generation of voters, you're talking about the most diverse generation of Americans ever in our history. So you're talking about also disproportionately a lot of Black and brown young people, and they're saying they're tired and fed up with that. So I don't know how shocking it is that someone who is in fact not of the establishment, sort of anti-establishment, and is speaking to the issues and meeting them where they are on the issues and talking about change in a really granular way, pit up against. And look, I've got nothing against former Governor Cuomo. I actually thought he was a pretty good governor. But he was certainly representative of the establishment and the status quo and among Democrats. So I don't think it's shocking at all that he built something and it grew and it gained more momentum and it eventually overcame what many became to see as much of the same establishment Democratic party, and backed by a lot of the old establishment. And as you know, a lot of the very wealthy and the money donor class there in New York.
Cornell, I watched Bill Clinton endorse Cuomo, and then Jim Clyburn came out forcefully at the end, and it just seems like all of these guys missed it. They're all now trying to shape their own futures around this new demographic. Sorry about that. There's a fire truck right here. The new demographic of voters that were clearly represented by Mamdani's victory. I'm going to let you wrestle with that question while I mute this fire truck behind me.
That's okay. Well, look, there is no, and I've said this over and over again. The key to Democratic majorities, and let's contextualize this for a moment, especially at the national level. When was the last time a Republican won a majority at the national level? It's been a long, long time, right? And so, but Democrats have, in the last couple of elections where they've won, they've generated majorities. Much of that is on the back of younger voters. Look, someone who I worked for and would not have become president of the United States was Barack Obama, and part of that movement that he built was fueled by the energy of young people and younger voters, and and approximately 11% of the electorate in 2008, when he was elected, were voters who had not been participating before. So he expanded the electorate, and they were overwhelmingly younger voters and younger voters of color. So our past majorities are built on a younger, more diverse electorate, the growing marketplace. And our future majority is going to be built on that same growing, diverse, younger marketplace. Although so much of what you read of the establishment coming out of the news in Washington is Democrats wringing their hands over how do we get more of Trump's vote, as opposed to why aren't these younger, especially these younger, more diverse voters who've backed us in the past, why are they pulling back and why are they angry at us? It's lower hang. Look, you're a campaign guy too, right? There is high hanging target fruit and there's low hanging target fruit. And I would say that these younger voters who are with us on 90% of the issues are lower hanging fruit than the trying to turn a working class white voters, which is non-college white voter who we Democrats haven't won in decades, trying to get those votes, as opposed to trying to understand why the young people are so frustrated and giving them what they need.
In terms of the appeal to red counties and to these red voters, if you will, Cornell, I mean, I get it, right? I supported, while I was in Congress, 9 amendments to the Constitution that largely accomplish all of our American dreams: the right to a public education of equal high quality, the right to health care of equal high quality, the right to a clean, safe, and sustainable environment. But I don't call myself a democratic socialist. Uh, I'm fighting for American ideals. So when Bernie Sanders or AOC or now Mamdani, with this very powerful youthful message, which is inclusive, it's diverse, it doesn't want to see the poor in their condition, it wants to change and build a, if you will, a better society, a more global community. But there's this movement that immediately began attacking Mandani after he was elected with the Democratic Socialist label. And the lowest white man, he just can't hear past that kind of reddish scare, if you will. And so I am concerned that the very outreach to MAGA voters that young progressives want to make, that some of this is in the labeling itself. Does any of your polling reveal what a labeling that does allow us to reach out to the other side with integrity?
Well, it's politics 101. He or she who defines the debate wins the debate, right? So if the debate's about socialism, you're putting yourself in a position where you're allowing them to define the debate. What the hell is a socialist, right? I could argue, Congressman, that everything you went down in the well to fight for when you were in Congress was socialist.
Yeah, I could argue that too. I
Yeah,
could argue Jesus was a socialist.
yeah. Well, I would absolutely argue that Jesus was a socialist.
Yes.
But is it socialism, or is it just fighting for the working class? Like Jesus fought for the poor, right?
And never heard of Karl Marx.
Right. So is it fighting for working class and poor people, or is it socialism, right? And we blow this up, and we overanalyze and blow things up. So we had him win in New York, a Democrat primary in New York. And all of a sudden that's the socialist and what's happening. Never, we just had 2 Democratic primaries in 2 states, not a city, but in 2 states, right? In New Jersey and Virginia, really important states, and Virginia being a really important critical battleground state where the more left candidate didn't win, right? You still had mainstream sort of Democrats putting forward ideals about working class and fighting for affordability. They won out, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about that. But so I'm going to pause there because I think we're supposed to go to a break.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show in this hour. My guest is Cornell Belcher when we come forward. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest in this hour is Cornell Belcher, one of the nation's leading political strategists, as well as researchers, pollsters on almost every conceivable issue under the sun. He looks for not only messages, but for messengers who deliver that message with sincerity and authenticity. Cornell, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Always good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Cornell, let me ask you a question. Is there anything that we can glean from the outcome of the two elections that you mentioned, as well as Mamdani's election about 2026 midterms?
You know, often, Jesse, and especially us in the media now, we try to spend too much time trying to, learn what, trying to take every election and making that a real big deal. And the truth of the matter is every candidate, and you know this well, every candidate is different. Every candidate has their own story and they have to be authentic to their story. I think what you see in New York is Mamdani was authentic to this story, but also was a classic, for me, a classic, contrast, right? You have youth and you have change and you have, versus the establishment and not so much change. And it was a perfect storm where a lot of voters, and look at how diverse his coalition was. I mean, Cuomo failed to run up the score in African American communities the way de Blasio did, and Adams did before him, and a lot of the younger Black voters apparently broke his way. So he spoke to something that voters were looking for. At the same time, you have Spanberger in Virginia, who, again, looking at her record and sort of her resume, how do you speak credibly to the angst of the Democratic voters in Virginia from where she stands, from her standpoint, right? And that was a sort of the lean into sort of her record in Congress and what she was doing to fight for working class voters. And the same thing I think is true in New Jersey with Sherrell, where, look, she talked about her background in the military and that sort of strength and service and patriotism, but also a lean into the issues of affordability, and also this idea of we got to stand up to Trump and sort of fight back on him rolling back rights and all this chaos.
So, I watched AOC. I think most of the country did, maybe even the world. This young bartender from New York come to Washington, D.C. with massive enthusiasm, amazing energy, and absolute clarity. But then I've also watched her dreams come to terms with the reality of, how do I pay for this stuff? I think I've seen that in the Brandon Johnson campaign when he ran for mayor of the city of Chicago. Highly idealistic, a teacher, someone who cares about people, a genuine spirit, a genuine desire, just a genuinely good person. But then he became mayor of a highly leveraged city by Richie Daley and by Rahm Emanuel, and the resources aren't there to accomplish those dreams. And now I see some of the promises that Mamdani is making, clearly idealistic. It comes with youth, but the reality of rent control in New York, paying for free transportation, and where that money comes from, at some point in time, our dreams as young people confront the reality, as you well know, Cornell, of governing.
Yeah.
And then there's a disappointment associated with how we all started out and the reality of getting something done.
Look, as someone who worked for, and you know this well, as someone who worked for Barack Obama in both his elections, right, and this hope and this change and all this energy, and I gotta tell you, it's funny because if you go from 2008 and then to 12, the election in 2012, and a lot of Republicans, the Romney campaign thought that we would not have the same electorate that we had, the electorate that looked like 2008. They thought they were going to win this because they thought we were going to have the John Kerry electorate again, right? But we kind of knew that we were going to have that the young voters were going to stick with them. Were they as energized and hopeful about Barack Obama after 4 years of governing as they were in 2008? No, but they were still determined to support the candidate they thought was fighting for them. And I think that is key here. Jesse, is this idea of who's going to fight for you. Look, we get bogged down in these policy back and forths, and you know this as well, and you know as well. I'll use you as an example. Look, for you, the time that you were in the House and your Democratic colleagues were in the House, this ideal of we've lost working class voters. What piece of legislation that you did not support that wasn't focused on working class voters, right? But in the end, you have a group of people who look at the bill again. I'm not even being partisan. Look at the bill that their big beautiful bill that supposedly they have. Look at what that bill does. That is an anti-working class bill. You can't get more anti-working class than a transfer of wealth from poor and middle class up the ladder and cutting healthcare benefits, right? And driving up costs for working people. But they are still winning a certain class of working class voters, because in the end, identity politics also matters. And right, they've tried to make this a bad word, but the Republicans are the kings of identity politics. Mm-hmm. Jesse, when they stand in front of when they go on stage and say, immigrants, Haitians are eating your cats and they're eating your dogs. That's not an economics message, right? They're playing chess and we're playing checkers, right? So there's also this piece that characters and identity, it absolutely matters. And you have to be authentic and representative of the message that you're putting out. And again, I would say to you that what you had in New York was a perfect storm of this young cat who does not look or behave anything like the establishment and the status quo that so many New Yorkers are upset about. That was the platform for him to catch fire. And right now, something just popped up on my on my news thread about how some of the New York big money New Yorkers are now meeting with Eric Adams again. And this is everything that the young people who are looking for change hate about our politics. Of course, now the really wealthy people who benefit from the status quo are now meeting with Eric Adams because they see this young guy as a threat to the status quo. And you know what those voters are looking for? So many of those voters looking for? They absolutely want to shake up the status quo.
You know, I think that that's certainly a fissure, if you will, in the Democratic Party. Here you have the progressives with Mamdani. We've won the Democratic Party in New York, fair and square. Eric Adams has moved over, very compromised history in the city of New York. And now you're sharing and breaking some news that the big money crowd is moving in the general direction of Eric Adams. I am a bit perplexed, however, about the future of the party itself, because I do see a civil war here. And I want to share with you that I do polling all the time, and I certainly did as a member of Congress, right? But it just feels like to me that polling around the truth, which is what you seek to do, Cornell, and the entire polling universe, that you can't even poll people who believe that Haitians are eating cats and dogs. It's not even a question you would raise and ask. And their reaction to something that outrageous, they're beyond being able to reach out to them with basic truth messages that could bring them into the fold. Please tell me I'm wrong. Please tell me I'm wrong.
No, but you're not wrong. But you also, well, look, we're both. You're a historian of politics. Jesse, it's a Southern strategy, right? It's Atwater,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we know it's not even dog whistles anymore, right? It's just overt, right? That these look again, they're eating your cats and dogs is triggering something else. It's the otherism, right? And we do know. Look, I think one of the biggest hustles that the media has pulled on the American people in the last couple of decades is the one they just pulled. Because they told us that the election between that old white guy who says, I want to take you backwards, versus the young woman of color who's the child of immigrants and represents the diversity of our future, who says, I want to go forward. They may just believe that election was about the price of eggs, and they're playing in our face.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, Cornell Belcher is going to hang with us for one more segment till 10 after the hour. When we come forward on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show, KBLA 1580 Talk. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest in the last hour has been none other than Cornell Belcher. Cornell is one of the nation's leading pollsters, certainly Democratic, but capable of polling everything from corporate trends to consumer behaviors. His research firm is one of the most recognized firms in the nation. Cornell, I want to ask you to share with our listeners for just a moment the process by which you seek information and research to make determinations about things. And then I want to leave because we only have about 6 minutes left in this segment. I always leave our guests an opportunity to provide us with a word of hope. Behind your research, behind your numbers, you see things that those of us who wake up and read the newspapers or listen to the news all day long don't see or hear. And you have some sense of the trends of where things are going. And we're living in a time where we need hope. So if you could share with us a little bit about your methodology and how you proceed with these issues, and then take us to a word of hope, we'd sure appreciate it.
No, thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity again. I'm gonna get into the weeds a little bit. Look, but I also step back and philosophically look. Polling is the job of polling is not to tell you the future. Pollsters and polls cannot tell you the future, and I think far too often the narrative that's happening in the media is they're looking for polls to tell us what the future is and who's going to win or lose. That's not what polling is or is built to do. And I referenced earlier to 2012, right, where a lot of the Romney team thought that Romney was going to win because they had because polling is both a science and an art. And the science, quite frankly, the science is easy because if you take the right classes and you get the right degree, and quite frankly, with the software now, the science is almost the easy part. The hard part is the art. And I bring it back around to 2012 because this is the art. It is what's the electorate going to be? And when polling is off or isn't or people get mad about polling, it's often because it's not because of the methodology or anything of the science of polling. The problem is the art of polling. And I think 2012 kind of shows that where the Republicans thought Romney was going to win because they had a picture or an idea of an electorate that looked more like the Kerry Bush electorate than it did the McCain-Obama electorate, right? So they were going to have an older electorate that was a lot less diverse and more conservative, which is what they had previously. And so they modeled around that electorate. We knew the enthusiasm and energy in 2012 wasn't what it was going to be in 2008. But, when I was doing the youth research for the Obama campaign in 2012, I know the energy the energy wasn't there, but the determination was still there. So I knew we were not going to have the 2004 electorate. Right, it might not be as the 2008 but was going to go back to 2004 electorate, and so our polling did show that Obama was winning, but the same thing is true here. And look, let's go back to New York. I remember the New York Times did you see often these polls come up, and it said, I remember in 2020 it was a headline said, Biden leads Florida. Right. And so to the layperson, Jesse, they see that headline and go, oh, Biden leads Florida, so Biden's going to win Florida. And that's not at all what that means, right? Because even in that case, if you're ahead, 3 or 4 points, no one was at a majority and you still had enough voters and undecided to change the outcome of that electorate, right? Which is what in fact happens. And even when you look at New York and all the polling up into the last closing weeks of it, it had Cuomo ahead, but you also saw that begin to shrink. But what you can't account for is the turnout that happened in New York, where you apparently had a lot more younger voters turning out and voting than you've had in the past. So people who were modeling their polling on what a typical electorate looks like in New York, you're going to be off because that energy and what he did to that electorate there with younger voters changed the face of that electorate a little bit.
So you can't poll the energy.
And by the way, that's not the job of polling, right? But don't look for polling to tell you the future. You know this well, right? Polling can tell you where voters are on X, Y, and Z issues. And from a campaign standpoint, we look for polling to tell us what's the best avenues for making inroads to both voters who may be persuaded, and also mobilizing our base and turning out our voters. It is not the least important number in a poll for a campaign is the horse race, because that number is going to change, and we're going to spend a lot of money and effort changing it.
We have about 1 minute before the break, maybe even a little less than 1 minute. In 50 seconds, share with us your hope.
My hope is that look, there's a lot of darkness and a lot of people frustrated with what's happening in this country right now, and all the authoritarianism and the fascism and the racism that they see on the march. But understand, everything that's wrong with democracy, we have the power to fix it, and it's
Mm.
all in our turnout, right? The majority of Americans are not for what the Trump administration is doing and what they represent. But we also have to have the majority of Americans coalesce in an election around a candidate or a party in a way like we did in 2008 and 2012 and 2020, right? There's a reason why Trump never gets to a majority, because the majority is not for him. But if we get strong turnout, and they coalesce around anti-Trump candidates, we are the majority. The majority of people are not for locking up and throwing immigrants in detention camps. They're not. They're not for stripping away voting rights. They're not for taking Medgar Evers' name off of a naval vessel, a veteran who fought for this country. That's not who most Americans are.
Mm. Cornell, thank you for being on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you'll come back and join us sometime.
Just give me a call.
I look forward to it. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, Johnny Mack, Just the Facts with Johnny Mack. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. In our second hour, our principal host is also a regular contributor on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Johnny Mack is the principal and managing partner of the Johnny Mack Group, LLC, and the founding director of the World House Project, Incorporated. Well traveled throughout America, Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, explicating Dr. King's call to restructure the social edifice and its triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism with a revolution of values that are effected through peaceable power. Johnny Mack believes in building communities without boundaries. His seminal work, After Confrontation, Then What? It seeks to rearticulate nonviolence beyond the traditional idea of resistance to the meta logic that indirectly includes structural, cultural nonviolence, each having its own form of social action. Johnny, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show and to the Straight Facts with Johnny Mack.
Well, Jesse, thank you. How are you? It's good to see you, man.
It's great seeing you. I mean, it is really a pleasure to see you, Johnny. Johnny is one of the most difficult people to tie down, but I can't do this without him. Johnny, I got a couple of questions for you.
Yes.
Since the last time we were together, the world's upside down.
Yeah.
And I know that since I've talked to you last, you've been traveling quite extensively around the world. But the crisis in the Gaza Strip, the crisis with the intervention by the United States in Iran, the implications of the tariffs on poor communities in Africa and poor countries in Africa and around the world, all of which have a direct impact on your seminal work, building a world house and fulfilling Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, which was largely charged to you by Coretta Scott King as the former chief financial officer of the King Center. Johnny, work with us here. This segment is our longest segment, and you can take your time.
Well, Jesse, you always give me the easy questions and present me with the problems that are at least problematic to solve. Jesse, I'm sitting in a hotel in Merida, Mexico.
You're in Mexico today.
In Mexico, as we speak. Merida is, you may know, in the Yucatan of Mexico. And I'm working with a partner organization called the Autonomous University of the Yucatan on a project where we will launch a series of conferences around the globe. Now, Jesse, I'm answering your question, by the way.
Take your time.
These conferences will be regional conferences with a global impact. And the subject of these conferences is the World House. Dr. King's vision of the World House, I think, was one that he gave so much study to. It wasn't just a figure of speech. It was an idea that he lived and worked so hard to create. And just think about that. A single individual, yes, he recognized that he became a voice not only for Black America, but a voice in the US and ultimately a voice that was global. And he understood that he could use that voice in order to affect a certain consciousness if only people would listen. Only he could be heard. And I was listening to your last segment with Cornell Belcher, and this idea that everything wrong, I think Cornell said, with democracy, we have the power to fix. And, the statement shook me. We, Cornell said, have the power to fix everything that's wrong with democracy. That was quite the spirit of Dr. King's idea of the World House. His final book is where we learn about the World House. That book is Where Do We Go From Here? Curiosity or Community. The final book just before his assassination. In that book, Dr. King charges us, I believe, us, we, who can fix democracy, with fixing it. Democracy is something that you practice. And where we've gone wrong, and I might take a little issue with the conversation about what's wrong with politics and democracy, because too many of us believe that fixing democracy is simply going to the polls. It's simply voting, and our work is done. And Jesse, that's the trick that's been played on us. I'm still answering your question.
Take your time.
Take your time.
The trick that's been played on us is to believe that all we have to do is vote for Jesse Jackson Jr. He'll get in Congress and he'll represent us through representative democracy.
Mm.
We're counting on you, Jesse Jackson Jr. We're counting on you, Barack Obama, as president. We're counting on so many to represent us in ways that change the very fabric of the social structure. When King understood that what really changes the social structure are the underlying values that drive it.
Mm.
So if we're going to save democracy, we have to think about what type of democracy and what values stand behind our democracy. Now, so when you think about what's happening in between Israel and Hamas, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, what's happening between Israel and Iran, but not only that, what's happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in South Sudan, and in so many other theaters across the globe. That is the problem, that we who have the ability to change democracy don't understand our power.
Mm.
And so our leaders, in quotes, are able to act on our behalf. And we haven't quite figured out to hold our leaders accountable and to get in the way, as John Lewis might say, and to get in good trouble.
Mm.
And I think that that's the underlying problem. We must protest, yes. We must exercise civil disobedience, but there's so much more. I'll stop there, Jesse, because I've talked too long. But the answer to your question is not in a single soundbite. It is an important discussion that we must continue to have.
Let me dig a little deeper, because some of it, I think, as we move towards community and away from chaos, it is represented by individuals. And a rare election occurred in the United States the other day. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did identify with Michael Harrington. He certainly, in a collection of sermons, talked about how the Christian should view communism, that the atheistic, anti-religious argument of Leninism and Stalinism was too much for the faithful to bear. But the tenets of loving your neighbor as yourself, providing the least of these with health care and with housing, certainly gives space to the idea that in common unity, in community, maybe not in communism, but where those of us who believe in God, community can bring something out of it that benefits and lifts all boats that might be stuck at the bottom. He did identify with Mom Donnie's democratic socialist message.
Yes.
So in that identification, that there's affordability, that transportation ought to be free, that education of equal high quality ought to be free, that healthcare for every human being in this country and beyond ought to be free. It seems to me that part of the chaos that we find ourselves in is that the shift in priorities from this world house vision to the I, me, my, everybody get theirs, Donald Trump. This is a big, what's the deal? Give me the deal. Let's make a deal. We bomb you now. Let's get to the deal. We take the minerals from Ukraine. assign a deal, but we leave them fighting. We want to deal with Iran, but we'll leave Israel and Iran fighting. We want a deal. It just seems that there's a content problem here, Johnny, that stands in the way of our own individual selfishness that calls us to move beyond that selfishness to the very shared value system that I think I heard you articulate.
I think you're right on point. Obviously, Jesse, you know, this atomistic, individualistic set of values that drive our democratic system as we understand it today. It drives our economy. It drives our culture. And it's a problem. And we've bought into this idea that the world is a dog eat dog, all against all world. And I have to get mine in. If you don't get yours, it's your problem. You didn't work hard enough. When the system itself is designed to benefit the few and not favor the many. And that's a difficult pill for us to swallow. It's a difficult notion for us to put our minds around. Because from cradle to the grave, whether it's through education, through the media, and through so many forms of communication, we are led to believe that if we just work hard enough, the system's fair enough, opportunity is broad enough that every one of us can enjoy the fruits of democracy, of our capitalistic society, and realize, this is most important, Jesse, realize their full potential. And it just isn't so.
Johnny, let me ask you this question. I know we have just about 3 minutes before the break, and so what happens at the 30. The question I have is, in light of that, it seems like the need for more democracy, not less. For example, I've argued on this show and in this ministry, this phase of my life, that the pardon power should be democratized. Power to forgive people belongs to everybody after you've paid your debt to society. Democratize it. I believe that the standard for education should be higher. I believe it should be of equal high quality. So let's give 350 million Americans the constitutional right to enter into court and sue their state legislatures and sue the Congress if necessary to build equal high quality schools, 90,000 of them. Let it become the largest job training program in the history of the United States. More democracy, not less. And if it means we need to build through healthcare the right to receive healthcare of equal high quality, I mean, you can't call me a socialist when I say it belongs in the Constitution, that if you have the constitutional right to a gun, why can't we have the constitutional right to healthcare of equal high quality? Give 350 million Americans the right to sue the state legislature if your local hospital doesn't have an MRI machine, doesn't have the beds available when you get sick. More democracy, not less. And it's very difficult to call me a socialist when I'm fighting to change the Constitution and give you more America, not less America, but more America, but on a shared basis.
Well, Jesse, I think I probably have about 49 seconds to respond before your break. And it's a very big question, but I'll give it a shot.
Well, I know that we're coming right back. So you're going to have 2 10-minute segments. But go ahead.
That's a good question. Yes. So the question is, what is democracy, right? And how do we hold it accountable as a system for making decisions about our lives, the quality of our lives? I don't think we fully understand that. And so, until and unless the people themselves are given the tools and take those tools, are given the social structures, take those social structures that drive not only our political systems, but our economic systems, because those very democratic issues that you raise are affected by our economic structure. How do you pay for them? I know you got a break.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. You're getting the straight facts with Johnny Mack. When we come forward, we're going to let him help us define what Dr. King's vision was in this very delicate hour of our national existence. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Our very special guest on Thursdays is the co-contributor of this program on with me. His seminal research work, After Confrontation, Then What, seeks to rearticulate nonviolence beyond the traditional idea of direct resistance to a meta-logic that includes direct, structural, and cultural nonviolence, each having its own form of social action. His professional work focuses on peace, conflict resolution using the metalogic of nonviolence. In it, Johnny seeks to foster the role of civil society in strengthening the social fabric through community building and development, which includes political, social, economic, and cultural strategies. His work seeks to realize Dr. King's vision by building communities without boundaries. Now, Johnny, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you.
You know, I don't think I've read the biography of someone whose life's work is more comprehensive. It seems to me in a real sense, and I hope you're not offended by this, but if I follow that logic, this path is its own path of spiritual, cultural, and social development. It's not a tactic. It is a conscious engagement through my whole person, which you'd think you'd get at church on Sunday morning, in really finding a way to live at peace with my neighbor.
Mm.
Talk to me, Johnny.
You know, the world, we have the world we want, Jesse. We have the world that we settle for. This idea of we the people, a Western idea for sure. But there are similar notions of us, of community, of the village, of Ubuntu, of the commonality of all humanity. That's really the work. The work is not what you and I were talking about in the last segment. It's not about the atomistic me. It is not about the individualistic me. That's important indeed. But I can't be, as King would say, what I ought to be unless you can be what you ought to be. We have to make room for each other.
Mm.
If I lived in this world all by myself, I could make the rules for myself and be unhappy with myself when those rules don't work.
Mm.
When we live together in community, or what you called common unity, that which affects me, King says, will affect you ultimately. So we are inextricably tied together in the garment of mutuality. That's what this conversation is about. And it's not just about you and me, but it's about us and everybody listening to us now. And it's about that collection and everything that's happening in the Middle East and in Southern Europe or Eastern part of Europe, what's happening in so many places throughout Southern Asia and Africa and South America. And so it's a life's work, but it's all of our work, Jesse. And we are not told, we are not conditioned to understand that each of us has a responsibility for the quality of life, the type of world that we live in. From kindergarten on up through our educational processes. Once again, we are taught that we have to fight and work for us, for me, individually. So, yeah, we have to be collective.
You know, I want to press that a little further if I can.
Mm.
So on October 7th, I am Israeli. I feel the pain of that.
Mm.
But on October 8th to the present, I'm also Palestinian.
Mm.
I feel the pain of that.
Mm.
If I'm my brother's keeper, I'm Russian, but I'm also Ukrainian. I mean, stop, enough. I'm Black, an African American tradition from a unique tradition in human history from 1619 to the present. but I'm also uniquely American.
Mm.
This is my flag. Our
Mhm.
people are responsible for adding stars to it too. We are responsible for amending the founding document, the Constitution, too. I'm not completely African.
Mm.
This is my country. This is where my family is buried. And so it's easy to take. I guess I'm as conservative. I mean, my worst Republican friend, even if it's 50% of the nation, they're still my brother and my sister over an external enemy that seeks to eliminate all Americans without any regard for whether you're a Democrat, Republican, white or black, Oriental, Occidental, North or South, or East or West. Well, we have to come together because our existence is threatened. And in this moment, I have to move beyond my sense of self to the collective self to recognize that I'm something bigger than myself and that we're all in this together.
Yes.
Talk to me, Johnny.
Yeah. So, and the question, Jesse, is how do we do that? Much of what we do and how we do, obviously, is socially and culturally embedded. Many, in the marketing industry, understand that we move toward what we think about. Human beings are what they call teleological in nature. Just think about that. We move toward what we think about. Those who understand that idea understand if we can control what you're thinking about, then we can cause you to move toward that. Think about that.
Mm.
And so if our minds can be shaped around a particular idea, and we can be sold that idea, and we can be convinced that idea is the truth, and we'll embrace that truth and we'll act upon it as truth. Therefore, I don't mean to be too philosophical here, Jesse, but that means we act in accordance with the truth. I think I've said this before in one of our shows. We act in accordance with the truth as we perceive it or believe it to be. Which means, Jesse, if we can change the way we think, we can change the way we act. And how do we do that? How do we rescue ourselves from the systems and communication processes that tell us how to think and act?
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, more with Johnny Mack. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest, our contributor on Thursdays, is the principal and managing partner of the Johnny Mack Group. He's the founding director of the World House Project. Johnny Mack, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show, to our show.
Thank you, Jesse. Always good to be here.
Johnny, let me ask you a question because, as you know, this is our final segment, and I'm always going to let you close on a word of hope, which I've reserved for the last 3 or so minutes. But you said something just before the break that has me reflecting. Basically, how we act and how we react seems to be at the crux and the heart of the matter. I'm reminded of something W.E.B. Du Bois, noted historical African-American sociologist, talked about in The Souls of Black Folk, the amazing two-ness of the Negro, which Dr. King also expanded upon. And then Carter G. Woodson, when he talked about in The Miseducation of the Negro, that even if you change the law, which constrains man's behavior against his fellow man, theoretically, that if the Negro had become accustomed to going in the back door, even if he had permission and the legal right to go in the front door, Carter G. Woodson says he'll cut a hole in the back door because he's so used to going in that even if the door isn't there, he'll make a way out of going in the back. And in that moment, I'm thinking about man's search for meaning, because Dr. King had great respect for Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor. When Viktor Frankl says that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. We're living in perilous times, Johnny. We are being stimulated every single minute. And in that stimulation, we have an opportunity to choose our response. And the choice that we make will determine our growth and our freedom. Help us get there, Johnny.
I hope I can be helpful. You've stated it well, Jesse. You know, another way of saying all of what you've just said is, we're the ones that we're looking for. We are the hope. If we don't act, if we don't respond, if we don't, in that lacuna, in that space, if we don't take the time to think through and to act upon the kind of life we want, the kind of life we want to leave for our children and their children, then there is no hope. Of course, Gandhi said, be the change that you were looking for. And we can be that. If only we can believe that we can be that change. But you got to believe. You got to believe in yourself. And we have to believe in each other. We have to believe in the good of each other. And I think, Jesse, that is the hope. And I'll say this. I said I was in Mérida, Mexico. I do a lot of work with young people. And Jesse, there's a lot of hope in those who come behind us. We just have to pave the way, and then we have to get out of the way.
I heard that.
You know, and that's the problem. You know, you were talking about the Democratic Party. You know, my Democratic friends won't appreciate this, but there are too many in the party in the way, and they're too long. That's the Republican Party as well. That's just the nature of the beast. And so I hope that I don't stand in the way, that I'm passing on to my children and to yours and to others, pointing the way, passing on what we've learned so that they don't make the mistakes that we made. They don't repeat the mistakes that we have made. And I think there's a lot of hope. If you travel the world, as I'm sure you do, Jesse, there's a lot of bright minds out there chomping at the bit to find their space and to add their drop of water into this great pond of humanity. And we have to help them do just that.
You know, I think everyone is born into a particular context. Dr. King laid out a timeline, and in the speech that I can't remember, he talked about the various generations that had the Almighty placed him in. He would have been grateful to have lived and seen that, but he wouldn't have wanted to have lived there. He would have loved to have gone past the Parthenon and heard Aristotle and Aristophanes and Euripides, but he wouldn't have wanted to stop there. And then he walked his way up to a vacillating president on the question of what to do with the Negro. He said, you know, I would have loved to have been there when Abraham Lincoln did that, but he said he wouldn't stop there. He said he looked at all of the problems in the 20th century and now the new problems of the 21st century, which obviously we lived to see. And he said that I turned to the Almighty and said, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to live a few moments in the time you did allow me to live, to do something about the time and the space, and ultimately to choose, I think, Johnny, which I've heard from you today, to choose the right response. And in that response, it's not just an acting out, it's a conscious response that the actions that we take matter in this process to build community.
That's right.
If I fire my gun back at you, if I spit on a National Guardsman, if I go off, then I'm only going to recycle going off. And I might end up with a National Guardsman's knee in my throat and recycle some more of that. But that my response matters, that he or she is also a human being, that they're following orders, and doesn't make the order just, but it does make it something that we have to wrestle with. Johnny, I have about 2 minutes left. Let me allow you the moment to share with us.
Well, thanks again, Jesse. I enjoy these conversations. I appreciate the opportunity. And I think that what we might leave your listeners, viewers, to think about is this: that this is in the spirit of King and those champions of peace and justice and nonviolence who came before us. We've been saying that, you know, it's the individual, and, you know, we must take charge of our lives and the life of our communities. There's something inside an individual, like King or Gandhi or Mandela or Chavez, or you pick the leader who understood that nothing splendid, nothing of real importance, nothing that truly matters, nothing great and everlasting has ever been achieved except by those who would dare believe, Jesse Jackson Jr., that something inside themselves is superior to circumstances. May I repeat it? Nothing splendid has ever been achieved except by those who would dare believe that something inside themselves is superior to circumstances.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You've been listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Our very special guest who joins us every Thursday is none other than Johnny Mack. If you ever really want to hear the truth, come here and hear it from a man who studies it all day. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Until tomorrow, where we will have Fat Meat Fridays with Gina Towns.